This is a slideshow, the Tibetan Imagery slideshow 1, which is an introduction to um, the kinds of painting that we're going to be looking at. Basically, this slideshow will show at the beginning examples of Karma Gadri style painting. Karma Gadri is Eastern Tibetan style, and we'll learn to see the difference between Central Tibetan style and Southern Tibetan style, and the Eastern school, which is called Karma Gadri, and is the one that we're going to give the most attention to, because it's my favorite, because it has the most Chinese influence and manifests the kind of emptiness that we're looking at. So the first slide is an example of Karma Gadri school, and there is a certain empty quality compared to most Tibetan painting. You'll notice that most Tibetan art is rather full of stuff, right? You'll see many figures, and there won't be the sense of spaciousness that you see in this one. This one almost looks like a Japanese or a Chinese composition. We see two figures on the left seated in the landscape, and there's a vast kind of space of emptiness, and Bodhisattva riding on some strange animal floating down in the sky. But it's the basic sense of emptiness that pervades this Thangka. Here's another one in this same series. These were painted by the 10th Karmapa, and it's very Chinese. The upper right part of the landscape, blue and green mountains. The deity in the sky is Samantrabhadra, and it's a very Chinese-looking deity, isn't it? Can you see the kinds of draperies and so forth? Looks like a Chinese goddess. And the transparency, the halo, and the way you can see things through the halos behind these two gentlemen. These two, in each case, there's 5 paintings here in the series, and there are 2 men who are Mahasiddhas. The word Siddha means power, and Maha means great. So the Mahasiddhas were the great yogis, and these 2 may be Mahapanditas, which could be translated as great scholars, so wisdom scholars, from about the 2nd to the 6th century in India. These gentlemen actually lived. So the main thing we're looking at is the kind of emptiness and transparent quality. The central painting here is Shakyamuni Buddha, and this one has the most detail. It's fuller than the other 2 in a sense, the detail around the figure, but the background again is very empty, isn't it? You see the foreground disappearing into the sky, and it's very sparse. You notice that the Buddha here is actually Shakyamuni Buddha, who lived 2,500 years ago. Okay, you'll get to recognize him. He comes up a lot. His mudra, his right hand is in the earth-touching mudra like this. And the reason for that mudra is when the Buddha received his enlightenment, there was Mara, the king of the demons, who was trying to keep the Buddha from getting enlightened and distracting him from his meditation. And when the Buddha received his enlightenment, Mara said, "Well, who witnessed this?" He says, "I don't believe it that you got enlightened. Who witnessed this?" And the Buddha touched the ground with his right hand, and there was a great roar of thunder, and lightning came from the sky. He said, "The earth witnessed my enlightenment." One of these mytho-poetical stories that we get all the time. It's the Tibetan form of history, which is not history at all. It's like legend. Okay, another painting in the series. The Sangha and Dharmakirti are the name of these two gentlemen sitting on the coffee table. And a Sangha is a lighter color than Dharmakirti. Can you see how white he is? Can you see how dark Dharmakirti is? Or he's not so dark, but he's quite a bit darker color, isn't he? Why do you think that the Sangha is white and Dharmakirti is dark? Got any idea?
My first guess would be that the lighter one is actually spirit.
Yeah. So a Sangha is already enlightened, and that's why he's white.
Okay.
Dharmakirti hasn't become enlightened yet, and he's still hanging on to his books and the words and his intellect, you see. And he's wearing his Pandita's hat, so he's still trapped by his intellect, his mind. In other words, in Buddhism, the mind is not just used for intellectual wisdom, but there's a higher wisdom which breaks through the intellect, which is intuition and knowing on a higher plane. Okay, so when you really know, let's say if you meditate for a long time, something will come to you and you will know that this is true. This is another kind of knowing. It's wisdom that comes from your own intuition. It can be also called like vipassana. Well, there's another word, I haven't got it right now, but wisdom which comes from a higher source, transcendental knowledge. It's not from books, it's not from something that somebody else said. It's not the kind of collected knowledge we get in books. It's knowledge that you know because you've experienced it personally. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about wisdom. And up in the sky is a deity. His name is Maitreya. He's the coming Buddha for the next age. He'll come in about 2,500 years. By the year 4,500, he'll be here, according to the mythopoetical Buddhist history. Maitreya, Maitreya. And he's supposed to be a Westerner. And that's why he's shown seated with his legs down. You see, he's got kind of a skirt there. But he's not seated in lotus posture with his legs crossed. He's actually supposed to be a Westerner, so he's seated like on a chair with his legs down. But again, you notice the quality of emptiness and spaciousness in these paintings, which is so different from most of the Tibetan art. And it's why I was so attracted to these paintings. They were so kind of Japanese or Chinese looking. Okay, here's the one that I have upstairs in the Thangka painting room. I've done a copy of this one. This is Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu seated on the raft. And in the water in front of them is the Naga princess. And Nagarjuna, the one on the left, went down under the waters to receive the teachings of emptiness from the Naga king, who had been keeping them for 500 years since the time of the Buddha. And he'd been guarding them for so long that he wouldn't give them up, even though he knew that Nagarjuna was the right one to receive them. So his daughter, the Naga princess, grabbed the teachings and swam up to the raft and turned them over. He was caught by his own attachment. So that's the story behind, that's who the mermaid is. The teachings that she's turning over to him are the Prajnaparamita teachings, which are the teachings about emptiness. And emptiness is not just a quality of, how can we say, it isn't just nothingness. Emptiness in this case means that whole idea of non-self that's basic to Buddhism. It basically means that, according to my teacher, the basic nature of mind is emptiness. So it's not that thinking isn't important, it's saying that there's a more important function of mind than thinking. Thinking is part of what we can do. That's the intellect when we think. But the other kind of inspiration and intuitional knowledge that we receive won't happen when the mind is busy doing all this mundane thinking and talking. So the analogy is that the mind is like a great lake, and if there are ripples on this lake, the little waves are like thought patterns. But when the thought patterns, when they die down and there's no more ripples, then the mind is clear like a mirror. And for the first time you can see the whole reflection of the moon in the water. And then you get some higher understanding. Or it's like the mind is like a sky, an empty sky, and the thoughts are like clouds, and they arise and they disappear. Like clouds just come out of nowhere and they go into nowhere. And the mind is like that. And if you meditate, you watch your mind, and you'll see that your mind is full of thoughts like clouds that pass through it. And they come and they go, and you don't hang on to them. But when there are no thoughts there, then there's an opportunity for higher mind to take over and show you the whole. You'll get a glimpse of the whole universe if you work at it, if you practice. So the emptiness that we're talking about is a mind that's empty of attachments and all the old junk and garbage that we've had in our mind since we were kids, all of our abuses and all of our traumas. So a mind that's really clear and empty is like a computer that's not overloaded with old programs. It's like a computer that's ready to work spontaneously in the moment, ready to go into action. So that's the idea of emptiness here, is the quality of mind that's not stained by old prejudices and is ready to operate. So here's another picture of Nagarjuna, and it's actually the same figure. Can you see the figure there? Look at the pose, and now look at the one on the left. Isn't that the same figure? So the artist in this picture has taken that other figure, and maybe he's copied it from that other figure, and he's put it in a different landscape. So this is not uncommon in Tibetan art for one artist to copy from another, or for the figure to appear in a different landscape. So this is still Nagarjuna, and he's seated in front of one of his students, and the student is quite a bit smaller, isn't he? And we see that a lot, that the teacher may be a lot bigger than the student, or the Buddha will be bigger than his disciples. And we find that in Christian art too, hieratic kind of painting, where the Madonna is a lot bigger than the people around her.
Was there a purpose for this type of painting, like certain deities are used to meditate or to concentrate on their qualities? Was this primarily to show lineage, or was there another purpose to this type?
This would be this would be a painting of Nagarjuna. It could be lineage, but basically it's I think you could say a commemorative painting of Nagarjuna, and it may have been commissioned by somebody who wanted to connect with Nagarjuna's energy. So, well, this old man is Taja, and he was at Rumtek Monastery when I was there in early 1972. He was the master Thangka painter who came from Tibet. And I consider him one of my teachers, although I only was there for a week. But I've copied one of his paintings that took me 2 years, so I feel like I studied from him by copying his work and other artists who worked with him. And he's now dead, but he was the master painter there and works in the style that I find the top quality, the Karma Gadri style. So here's a drawing of the Vajradhara, or Dorji Chang. The name of this deity is Vajradhara, or Dorji Chang. And this is the first figure in the lineage that belongs to the Kaju lineage. So here is the painting. In the painting, the deity is blue. And that blue symbolizes absolute emptiness in this case. You could say spaciousness, but emptiness. Are you getting cold? Is it chilly? You all right? I can get you a blanket if you...
No, I'm fine.
Are you? Okay. So you'll see that his two hands are crossed like this, and he's holding a Vajra and a Vajra bell. So that's his mudra. That's how you can tell. He is actually a Buddha dressed in Bodhisattva's clothing. You see all that jewelry and the crown? That's usually what Bodhisattvas wear. And the silk scarves flying around. So sometimes we see Buddhas dressed in Bodhisattva's clothing. And this is an example of that.
How can you tell that he's a Buddha? Or what is it?
Well, I know that he's Vajradhara because of his mudra. So he is, I know that he's a Buddha.
I mean, like, how could I tell looking at him?
You wouldn't know. You'd have to know who he was. Yeah. You.
Oh, well.
Right. So here's the first living being in this lineage we're talking about, called the Kagyu lineage. This is one of the four lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. You know about that at all? There are four major sects. Okay. So this gentleman's name is Tilopa, and he wasn't a monk or anything like that. He was a wild, crazy yogi. He practiced yoga and meditated, and yogis are always shown in this tradition wearing almost nothing. He's got a kind of a skirt on here, and he's wearing a lot of bone ornaments. Can you see those sort of silvery-looking ornaments? He's wearing bone ornaments, which are made of probably of human bone to remind him of his own impermanence, that death is part of our process. The Buddhists really believe in the understanding of life being birth and death process. And he's always shown with a fish in his hand. And that fish symbolizes the fact that he lived by the side of the river and he caught fish for a living. And he was kind of a fisherman. But what's interesting about the painting itself, and this is one done by the old man Taja, is the transparent quality of the paint. Can you see how wonderfully transparent that is? So here's the Chinese influence. Eastern Tibetan art has this Chinese influence. There's a sense of transparency. It's not solid looking. It has the quality of luminescence and so forth. And a lot of the forms have Chinese kind of style. For example, the clouds and the water and the cloth that he's sitting on has patterns which are very Chinese in their style. Up in the sky, there's a couple of figures against that red sort of flame background, and those figures are called yidams. And that's another word that we'll have to learn at some point. And yidams are deities that we meditate on, which are transformation deities also. They're the ones that help us turn our negativity around into positive activity. So in the same way we were talking about upstairs, that kind of alchemy of transformation. And those two in the sky here are, the male is Chakrasamvara, that's his name, and the female is Vajra Yogini. And they're shown in Yab Yum, which is mother-father posture, which is actual sexual union. But there's nothing sexual about this paint symbol. It's usually a symbol of union, and it really is describing something that happens to the mind. It's not physical union we're talking about here. It's when your mind, through meditation, suddenly merges with the universe, with the rest of the planet, and you have that sense of no longer being a separate being, when you merge with the rest of the galaxy. So it's a transcendental state of union. And usually union is accompanied by a very blissful feeling. If you have this mystical experience, it's a very joyful experience. Your mind may merge with the universe at some point. Some people take LSD, but it could happen without that. And it's a very blissful experience. You might be in tears. You may have that experience. You may have already had it at some point. So you'll know what I'm talking about if you've had it. But it's one of the things that happens and this is a symbol of that kind of merging, and often people misunderstand the sexual part as thinking it's something sexual. It's not really, but it's a wonderful symbol of union. So this is the best disciple of that last man. His name is Naropa. He's got a skull cup in his hand, and that's his symbol. So the first one had a fish, this one has a skull cup. And his best student was the first Tibetan in this lineage. Those two yogis were Indians, and they lived in the 8th century. And this is Marpa, who traveled all the way down from Tibet to India to take the teachings of Naropa and bring them back to Tibet. He was called Marpa the Translator, and he brought all the teachings back to Tibet in about the 10th century. Marpa was not a yogi, or, well, he was in a sense a yogi, but he wasn't a monk either. He was a farmer, he was a householder, and that's his wife, Namema, who's holding the white cup in her hand. And this is, Marpa's best student was this man whose name is Milarepa. Milarepa was a yogi. He wasn't a monk either. And Milarepa actually had become a black sorcerer. He was a black magician because when he was quite a young boy, his father died, and his uncle made slaves of Milarepa and his sister and his mother. And Milarepa's mother said to him, "Milarepa, my son, when you are 21, I want you should go out and become a black magician, sorcerer, and kill your evil uncle." And he said, "Yes, mother, I'll do it." And he did. He went out and learned how to make hailstorms and thunder, and he caused a big storm to come down on the uncle's house. The horses got frightened down in the basement. They knocked the pillars out of the house. The whole thing collapsed. People died. And not only that, the hail came down and ruined the crops, and everyone was terrified of Milarepa because he had become a wild, wicked sorcerer. And Milarepa's mother was very happy. The uncle got killed. Milarepa was happy that he pleased his mother, but at the same time, he killed a lot of people. He had created a lot of bad karma, and he was really miserable because he had a lot of guilt over killing all these people, but he had to do what his mother said, right? So he went off in search of a white guru who was equally powerful to purify him from all his negativity. So who did he find? He found Marpa. And Marpa kicked his butt for about 6 years, treated him like dirt, and made him build palaces and temples. He had to really work him hard to purify all this bad karma. There's a 9-story tower that's one of the classic stories that he had Milarepa build. He said, "Build this tower here." And when he finished building it, he says, "It's finished, sir." Marpa said, "Tear it down, you idiot, and put it over here." And he just kept doing that. So finally, Milarepa was purified. He became a very advanced, enlightened being. And whenever he talked or gave teachings to anyone, he was so advanced that instead of talking, he sang. And everything he said came out in terms of song. There's a book called The 100,000 Songs of Milarepa, which is a wonderful book to read, and it's his stories and teachings to all of his students. And they're really wonderful stories, very earthy. And he was supposed to have had magical powers, could fly in the air and transform himself into flowers and other kinds of manifestations, and truly charming. If you read his book, you'll love it. So,
There's a comic book that tells the story.
yeah, there's a comic book by Eva Van Dam, the Dutch woman. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
It's great. I have that too.
I didn't know what it was. I love the story.
Oh, you've read it?
I have it,
Okay,
yeah.
That's it. Okay,
Yeah.
that's Milarepa. And his best disciple was Gampopa. Gampopa was a doctor, and he was married, and his wife died when she was 21, and she said to her husband, she said, "Before I die," she says, "promise me you'll never have another woman." So he says, "Okay, dear." So he went off and became a monk, and in a particular order, and then he met Milarepa and started the whole Kaju lineage, and his best disciple was Luzon Chempa. And he was the first Karmapa. So the Karmapas are the heads of the Kaju lineage, which is the lineage that my guru belonged to. And you can always tell the Karmapas by their black hats. The black hat was actually given to the fifth Karmapa by one of the Mongolian emperors out of respect, and it was said that it was made from the hair of Dakinis, which are kind of Tibetan angels. And the Karmapa, when he wore his hat, he always had one hand on it so it wouldn't fly off into the air. It wouldn't just rise up off of his head and disappear. But again, you can see the quality of these paintings, the wonderful transparency, the composition, which is rather un-Tibetan. Even the composition, instead of being symmetrical, it's quite unsymmetrical, like a Japanese print. The major figures on the side, and it's very carefully balanced between the major figure, the yidam up at the top, the other figures are on the side, but it has this wonderful transparent luminous quality, hasn't it? Okay, so here's another Karmapa. They always have their black crown and similar attributes, similar style of painting, all by the same master. One with a red crown who's either a Sharma Rinpoche or a Situ Rinpoche, and these were the teachers of the Karmapas in between the generations of Karmapas. They wore red crowns. Here's one with a pointed hat, and this is Jamgun Kontro Lodro Taye. And he lived in the last century, was a very famous scholar and meditator and so forth. And he's also part of this lineage. Very typical of the clouds in Karma Godri painting, the very flat, looks like 2x4s, a kind of flat cloud pattern stylization. And here we have two of the protectors. The protectors are a special kind of deity. They're called Dharma protectors. And in this case we have Palden Lamo, who's a female protectress. She's equivalent to Kali in the Hindu faith, if you know who Kali is.
What's her name?
Her name is Palden Lamo. P-A-L-D-E-N L-H-A-M-O. And Palden Lamo is shown here. There's two figures there. She's the smaller one. She's shown here with Bernard Chen, who's a small Mahakala. So she's a Mahakali and he's a Mahakala. And they are the wrathful protectors who protect the Dharma. But I used to say, why, if it's really the true Dharma, why does it need protecting? And the answer is that what's being protected is our own mind, from our own negativity, from our own wrathful states, from our own, dark tendencies. So this is a close-up of those two yidams that we saw earlier, Shakasambara, the blue one, and Vajrayogini, the red one, in Yab-Yam, or mother-father posture. And these are the two most powerful yidams in the Kaju lineage. Oops, what happened to that one? Let's see if I can get that one to come down. One of them stuck up there. Never mind. It was another picture of Paja. And this is the classroom showing some young Tibetans painting. And instead of having easels, they just tied their canvas with a rope to the ceiling. There would be a hook on the ceiling. They made a wonderful easel. This young monk is painting two pictures on the same canvas. Can you see that? And he's got a board across there so his dirty hands won't smudge the painting. It looks like Padmasambhava on the left and Mahakala on the right. So you're getting all these names. Don't worry about catching them all. They'll come to you after a while. You'll make friends with them. So this painting is not done by Taja. This was done by my first teacher. I think that William Bill also had Glen Eddy and at Europa. Did you?
I took some classes,
From
but not
Glen,
for a
right.
long time.
So Glen Eddy was my first teacher. He was an American Thangka painter. And if it hadn't been for Glen Eddy, I would have never become a Thangka painter. Because I didn't think that Americans or Westerners could do Thangkas. I thought it was too fine. I thought it was too difficult. I thought you had to be born Tibetan to paint Thangkas, you know. I had been an abstract expressionist with using big brushes, and to come down to the fineness of a Thangka I thought was impossible. But when I saw him doing it, I thought, I can learn to do that. So I started. So this is one of Glen's paintings, and it's in that Karma Gadri style. Can you see the style I'm talking about? The emptiness, the kind of spaciousness, and the transparent quality. And this is the whole lineage that we've just been looking at. Remember when I talked about Vajradhara? Well, there's Vajradhara up at the top, and there's Tilopa with his fish, and there's Naropa with his skull cup, and there's Marpa with his crew cut, and there's Milarepa, there's Gampopa, and there's Dzumchempa, the Karmapa, and at the bottom is Trungpa Rinpoche himself, who just died a few years ago, who was one of the Tibetans that was one of the major teachers in this country in the last 20 years. There's a close-up of Trungpa Rinpoche. This would have been 1974, quite a long time ago. You can see the rocks up there, the style of painting, dark to light, the kind of contrast, the texture of those rocks. This is a close-up of Vajradhara and the Tilopa and Naropa, those Indian yogis. Marpa. This is a close-up of the rocks. You can see the little brush strokes, the shading.
Was this done in gouache?
Yeah, I would say this is probably mostly Winsor Newton paint. Yeah.
What is the clouds? I never knew that those bars were clouds. I thought there's a fluffy cloud.
Well, these are bar clouds.
Bar cloud. It's just like the strata.
Yeah, right. But they're a very distinct kind of stylization, aren't they?
Yeah.
Now, here's a couple of other painters, and they live in the Darjeeling, and I've had the good fortune of spending a lot of time in Darjeeling and getting to know them. The one on the left's name is Gega, and he's one of the masters of the Karma Gadri style, and his best student is Singye, the one on the right. And the painting pinned to that wall is a little Bernard Chen, a small Mahakala, and it's done on black pigment. It's called a Nagtong. And the reason for that is that the word black is Nagpo in Tibetan, and Thangka is the word for painting. So if you take the first syllable of Nagpo and Thangka, you get a Nagtong, right? So that means a black painting, and all the lines are done in real gold. And there are red paintings which are called martongs, and there are gold paintings which are called sertongs. Similarly, from Marpo being red and Serpo being gold. So this is Green Tara, who's the feminine aspect of compassion. And she's one of 21 Taras, actually. She's kind of the head woman of 21 different women who are all named Tara. But Green Tara is the kind of leader of all these. And there are red ones and yellow ones and white ones and blue ones and green ones. But her aspects or attributes are not only compassion, she's also kind of a mother goddess and fertility, and she's also a savioress in time of need. If you're suddenly being attacked by a pack of wolves, or if you're being bitten by a dog or a scorpion or something, not a Scorpio, a scorpion. The Tibetans believe that you can call on Tara. You call out her name and she will come and save you and help you. She's a savioress. And when we see white Tara, she has all the same aspects as green Tara, except she has the additional attribute of long life. So white Tara is one of the feminine deities of long life. And you can see that Gega's painting is very much in the Karma Gadri style. It's very spacious. There's that sense of distance, landscape, clarity. This is Gega's painting of Milarepa. He's got his hand cupped to his ear because he's singing one of his songs and he's listening to the sound of his voice in the echo like a singer would. And in this painting, there's a lot of little things, little figures. And this painting not only shows Milarepa in the center, but it also shows stories from his life illustrated all throughout the painting. So you could take this painting and read it, actually, as a story, and maybe talk about it for a couple of hours, telling anecdotes about each one of these little figures, different stories of his life. The other thing about Gega's painting is the lightness of it. It almost looks like snow country, doesn't it? That's another typical quality of Gega's work. Here's Gega's painting of Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava is an Indian guru who came to Tibet in about the 7th century. He was brought by one of the kings of Tibet to help subdue the wrathful demons who were wandering around Tibet and harassing the natives. So Padmasambhava came, and in fact, a lot of the wrathful deities in Tibetan Buddhism were the ones that he subjugated, and he made Buddhists out of all these wrathful types. You know, those ones with all the heads and arms and teeth and oogie boogie eyes. So Padmasambhava was a great sorcerer, great teacher who was successful in subjugating all these wrathful forces and bringing them into line. He's said to be an emanation of the Buddha himself, but the Buddha lived maybe 1,500 years previously, but they believe that he was a reincarnation of the Buddha, that he was as enlightened as the Buddha. And Padmasambhava is said to have had a virgin birth, that is, as a baby, he was born out of a lotus leaf on a lake. In the middle of this lake arose a lotus, and on the leaf of the lotus was this little baby, Padmasambhava. So here's the virgin birth. Shakyamuni Buddha, by the way, also was a virgin birth like Jesus. The Buddha's mother, Queen Maya, issued the Buddha from her right hip. Believe it or not. That's the story. We'll see more of that later. But
when Taja paints something like
this is Gega. Yeah.
Okay, Gega.
Yeah.
When Gega paints something like this, is he painting from a model exactly like this, or does he have multiple Thangkas and then his composition of putting them in different places is his own?
Well, right. The figure is done precisely from the Tigsei. Actually, all the figures are done precisely from the Tigsei. But he's placed them in the composition. He's chosen the composition, where the mountains go, where the water goes. So it's his composition, his choice of placement.
Each one of the deities, though, in this, was he looking at a Thangka in the room, and then he knows the Tigsei, but is he also looking at a...
Probably not. He's probably just looking at a Tigsei.
And the Tigsei is just the grid, or it's everything?
It's the grid plus those energy patterns. It's the superstructure, the under superstructure, and plus all the details of the figure itself. So there's two parts to the Tigsei.
So he'll have many scrolls in his room or in the area where he's painting, and he'll bring these out and actually look at them, and they have all these details.
In some cases, master artists memorize all this stuff. We're not to that stage yet, but they can occasionally just sit down and draw a whole figure, from memory.
Do they always draw the actual grid in the background before they paint?
Usually, but as I say, some master painters can draw the figure without a grid even, or that good. But that would be a very exceptional master. This is a close-up of one of Gega's wrathful Mahakala paintings. You can see all the lines. They're all painted with real gold paint. So there's a lot of gold in this process. Often precious and semi-precious stones will be ground up, turquoise, coral, and so forth, for various colors. And I don't suggest that students use precious minerals, because there's enough work to do just in learning to do the drawing and painting. If you had to spend a lot of time gathering precious minerals and grinding them, it might take you 20 years to do a Thangka, right? I met a Canadian girl, for example, who had spent 7 years collecting precious minerals for her Thangkas, but she hadn't lifted a brush. So, I mean, and she wasn't going to start drawing until she collected all the stones, but this was 7 years later, right?
He's very good. This painter is very good.
Gega's very good, yes. And this is his best student, Sanje. Sanje was a monk, and then he got interested in bicycles and karate, and then he came to this country and he finally got married to a Chinese woman, and he has his own school of Thangka painting in the Bay Area called the Karmagadri Thangka Institute. And this is Singe's painting of Avalokiteshvara, which is Chenrezi in Tibetan, four-armed bodhisattva of compassion. So Chenrezi would be the compassion aspect, and Manjushri would be the wisdom aspect, if you were looking at those two balancing factors of enlightenment, compassion and wisdom. So Chenrezi, also known as Kuan Yin in China and Kannon in Japan. You may have heard of Kuan Yin.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the same person, the same deity with a different name. Chenrezi, Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin, Kannon. Names for the same archetype.
How do you spell it with
Chenrezi is Chenrezig, and the Sanskrit is Avalokiteshvara, Avalokitesvara.
This is also coming out of the lake. Is there a relationship between this and Padmasambhava?
Well, no, there's no virgin birth implied here, but very often the lotus, you see the sun disk that he's sitting on, actually it's a moon disk in this case. A moon disk is that white shape that he's sitting on. The moon disk is sitting on a lotus flower, and the plant that supports the lotus is growing out of water. So very often it comes out of water just because it's a plant that grows in water. The lotus grows in water, and the symbolism here is purity, that a lotus can produce a pure white flower when it's growing in really filthy, mucky mud. And that's the symbolism of purity, both in Hinduism and in Buddhism. That out of this mud become this wonderful, pure flower. So that's why the lotus is a symbol of purity. But because of the, it's just a natural, organic idea of coming out of the water. Singe's painting is as good or better than Gega, actually, for a young man. He's really wonderful. This is his green Tara painting. And this is his Padmasambhava. This is a very tiny painting. It's only about 6 by 9 inches. You can see how big the brocade is on the side. And what wonderful detail. You can see the gold in the staff, gold in Padmasambhava's jewelry and hat and so forth.